Good evening, everyone. We're really excited to have you here tonight. In his opening remarks on Sunday, Peter Boghossian noted that for thousands of years, man pretended to know things he did not, in fact, know. Today, we pretend not to know what we do, in fact, know. Laughter is one of the best antidotes to willful lies. As a champion of comedy, Seth Dillon knows this all too well. My name is Audrey Unverfirth, and I'm the communications manager for UATX. Tonight, I am honored to introduce Seth Dillon, the CEO of the world's best satire site, the Babylon Bee. Wife racing to clean house before firefighters arrive. Biden announces space train. San Francisco announces that, due to crime, it's moving to Texas. These are just a few of the Babylon Bee's latest hits. With wit and a conscience, Seth and his team make a mockery of the postmodern West. They defend truth by laughing at lies. After being censored by big tech for telling a joke, Seth recently testified before the House Energy Committee, where he defended free speech and made the moral case for mockery. Tonight, Seth's lecture is titled Canceling Comedy, Censorship, Satire, and the Babylon Bee, and there will be time for questions afterwards. Please join me in welcoming Seth Dillon to the stage.
Thank you for that introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm Seth Dillon, CEO of the Babylon Bee, the world's most trusted, factually accurate news source. Hopefully some of you have heard of us. We've actually surpassed The Onion now in traffic and engagement to become really the second most popular satire site, just behind CNN.com. So it's a great accomplishment. We really are ahead of The Onion, though. We have surpassed them. CEO is my official title at the Babylon Bee, but it's not the only way I've been described. I've been described a little differently in the media. They've called me a social media agitator, an internet provocateur, an unassuming middle-aged man, which I object to. I'm assuming. A far-right progenitor of disinformation. I kind of like that one, honestly. For our role in prompting Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter, the Washington Post referred to me as one of Musk's shadow crew misfits, whatever that means. And recently, a reporter described me as an expert online troll. I think personally that's my favorite. Although I was just called a champion of comedy tonight, so I like that one too. What can you hope to learn tonight from an expert online troll? Well, probably not much, but I do run a comedy site that's been repeatedly fact-checked, smeared, and censored, and that's seen nearly 100 of its jokes come true as if they were prophecies instead of punchlines. So I think I have a somewhat unique perspective on the madness that's resulted from our culture's all-out war on reality and reason. And there is a war, by the way, on reality and reason. That's not hyperbole. Some might say that it is. In fact, I think it's an understatement. I don't even know if I can describe how dire the situation is, but I do know that it's easy to become so accustomed to madness that we become numb to it. I think we need to resist that tendency. We need to continually remind ourselves that our culture's craziness isn't normal or good or deserving of acceptance. It must be consciously and constantly resisted. There's this common misconception that people have about the bee because of how crazy the world is today. If you go back to 1911, G.K. Chesterton said the world is too absurd to be satirized. That was in 1911 he said that. I think we've come a little bit further along in the modern world. But there's this idea that our job should be easier than ever because there's so much to make fun of, because things are so crazy. And in one sense, I can see where they're coming from. But really, the job of the satirist is to exaggerate the truth to make a point, right? We go a step beyond the truth in the direction that the truth is pointing in. And so it's like a caricature. And that's challenging to do when the world is basically a parody of itself. It's not easy. In fact, I think that the insanity of the modern age has made our job more difficult. I try to put it in this context. I ask people, I'm like, imagine if your job was to write jokes that are funnier than what politicians are doing in real life. Seriously. Imagine if your job is to write jokes that are funnier than a Kamala Harris speech. Good luck. Sometimes we do pull it off. We write a joke that lands and it gets shared a lot, and it hasn't yet come true. But you give it a few hours, a few weeks, a few months, eventually it does. We did one. It's actually one of my favorites. A lot of these are jokes that are aimed at the left because we're like a conservative comedy site. But sometimes we'll do a joke about a Republican or a conservative. We did one about how Trump had claimed to have done more for Christianity than Jesus himself. And it went crazy viral. Like, there were actually New York Times reporters who shared that joke thinking it was true. It was real. And that was in 2019 that happened. And then in 2021, he went on a radio show and claimed to have done more for Christianity and religion in general than any other person in history. Now, Snopes had already fact-checked our joke and rated it false. So I don't know what they do when the false joke comes true later on down the road. I don't know how they handle that. I don't think they have a way to handle that. But it happens on both sides. It is challenging to stay a step ahead of reality and to write jokes that are funnier than what politicians are doing in real life. We're also criticized, it's a weird criticism of comedy, I think, but we're criticized for having jokes that are too believable. It's like we're trying to intentionally mislead people. Your grandmother only shared that joke on Facebook because she thought it was real, and we duped her into sharing it on Facebook. But I think it's a silly and kind of ridiculous criticism of comedy because jokes are funny because of their proximity to the truth, not their distance from it. And we all know this. I mean, we say all the time, it's funny because it's true, or there's a grain of truth in every joke. We intuitively understand that a joke has to be somewhat believable, there has to be rooted in reality, or it's not going to land, it's not going to make a point. The problem right now isn't that our satire is too close to reality, it's that reality is too close to satire. And I think that if the Bee goes out of business, it won't be because someone else is funnier, although I guess that's possible. It will be because satire and reality have finally merged and become indistinguishable from each other. And I don't know that we're too far off from that. But you'd think all of this, the path to craziness, the path to madness, the path to lunacy would give us pause. You'd think that we'd consider tapping the brakes once we saw that we were turning the world into a parody of itself, but we haven't done that. We haven't course-corrected. Instead, we're accelerating in the wrong direction, and we're calling it progress. We all want progress, C.S. Lewis said. But if you're on the wrong road, progress means doing an about-turn and walking back to the right road. In that case, the man who turns back soonest is the most progressive. But the so-called progressives in positions of power aren't turning back, and they aren't laughing either. Instead, they're giving jokes a truth rating. Jokes are no longer funny, they're false, and false information is dangerous. It must be censored. Our experience with big tech censorship dates back to 2018 when Facebook started working with fact-checkers to crack down on the spread of so-called misinformation. We published a headline that read, "CNN purchases industrial-sized washing machine to spin the news before publication." Pretty stupid joke, honestly. It was funnier that it got fact-checked. Snopes rated it false, prompting Facebook to threaten us with deplatforming and demonetization if we continued sharing false stories on our page. Now, over the years, that wasn't the only time that happened. It's happened many times. We did one about how, this one went crazy viral. It was about how CNN had praised the Taliban for wearing masks during an attack. Very viral, also fact-checked and rated false. And then one that National Review called the stupidest fact-check in fact-check history. We had done a joke about how the Ninth Circuit Court had overturned the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And USA Today fact-checked that joke. A ridiculous joke, by the way. How do you overturn somebody's death? And they cited 15 sources in their lengthy refutation of that joke. And the thing that was most concerning to me was if you scroll down to the bottom of that fact check, it took a while to get to the bottom of it, you'd see all these sources, and then underneath that in italicized font, this fact check was paid for in part by grants from Facebook. So Facebook was funding the fact checks that they were then citing as their reason for wanting to deplatform us. I found that interesting. But yeah, over the years, we've been repeatedly fact-checked, flagged for hate speech, and removed for incitement to violence, resulting in a string of warnings and a drastic reduction in our reach. Even our email service suspended us for spreading harmful misinformation. We found ourselves taking breaks from writing jokes to go on TV and defend our right to tell them in the first place. And I think that's a very awkward position to be in as humorists in a free society. Last year, we made a joke about Rachel Levine, a transgender health admiral in the Biden administration. USA Today, had named Levine Woman of the Year. So we honestly thought that was funny. And we thought, how do we handle this? What's the right satirical take on this? How do you parody that which seems like a parody of itself? And so we just did kind of an obvious and not so funny joke, in my opinion. We said, it was kind of just in defense of women and sanity, that we named Rachel Levine our pick, the Babylon Bee's pick, for Man of the Year. Twitter didn't like that very much. They were not amused. They locked our account for hateful conduct, and we spent the next 8 months in Twitter jail. This is how the system is rigged to protect the popular narrative. Big tech has been defending a fantasy world where 2 and 2 make 5 by censoring anyone who so much as jokes about what reality is really like. And this is a key point that can't be overemphasized. Censorship guards the narrative, not the truth. In fact, it guards the narrative at the expense of the truth. And some people are fine with this because they prioritize feelings over everything, including our rights and even reality itself. But never let it be said that such people care even a little bit about the spread of misinformation. You have no interest in fighting misinformation if you're trying to silence anyone who's still sane enough to refer to adult males as men. It's long past time to drop that laughable pretense. I should add, though, that Twitter actually went beyond censorship when instead of removing our joke themselves, which they easily could have done, they required us to delete it and admit that we engaged in hateful conduct. That's not censorship, it's subjugation. And we never even considered it. What made this all the more outrageous, though, in our view, is that Twitter's had this lip service commitment to free speech in their terms of service. If you visit the site's policy on hateful conduct, it starts out with a ringing tribute to free expression. Twitter's mission, they write, is to give everyone the power to create and share ideas and information and to express their opinions and beliefs without barriers. Free expression is a human right. Twitter wrote that. This is pre-Elon Twitter. But this rings hollow when you consider the rest of the policy, which before Elon took over and restored free speech, prohibited misgendering and dead naming and other things like that. They'd baked radical gender ideology into the terms of service so that even objectively true statements became enforceable policy violations. Now, it'd be one thing if these ideas were merely popular, but porting them into the terms of service of massive public platforms has taken them from mainstream to mandatory. You can't criticize them. And now, thanks to hateful conduct policies, you can't even joke about them. Comedians are being canceled, in some cases physically attacked if they step out of line and tell an off-limits joke. But thankfully, there are some comedians who are pushing back on this, and I think Bill Maher is an excellent example. I have a ton of respect for him, even though I disagree with him on almost everything. He recently devoted an entire monologue to mocking so-called gender-affirming care for kids. He said, "Kids are fluid about everything. If they knew at age 8 what they wanted to be, the world would be filled with cowboys and princesses. I wanted to be a pirate. Thank God no one scheduled me for eye removal and peg leg surgery." Some might call that hate speech, but I think it's funny. The comedian's job is to poke holes in the popular narrative. If the popular narrative is off limits, then comedy itself is off limits. And that's basically where we find ourselves right now. The only reason Twitter is now an exception is because the world's richest man took matters into his own hands and declared comedy legal again. The Washington Post reported that on his first day as CEO, Elon Musk walked into the office of the head of trust and safety and issued an urgent directive: bring back the Babylon Bee. We've been trying to think of a joke worth $44 billion ever since. I hope we can all agree that we shouldn't have to depend on benevolent billionaires to safeguard speech. That should be, it's supposed to be, a function of the law. But the law only protects against government censorship. It hasn't yet caught up to the fact that the vast majority of public discourse now takes place on privately owned platforms. So where's the law that protects us from them? The lovers of censorship will tell us there can be no such law. The Constitution won't allow it, but they're wrong, and their arguments fail. I only have time to address a couple of them here very briefly. But first, they say private companies are free to do whatever they want, and I think that's nonsense, especially when applied to companies that serve a critical public function. A transportation service can't ban passengers based on their viewpoints, nor can telecom providers. Under common carrier doctrine, these companies are required to treat everyone equally, and that precedent applies very comfortably to big tech. The argument that only government can be guilty of censorship falls short because it fails to make a crucial distinction between the way things are and the way they should be. If these platforms are the modern public square, as the Supreme Court has described them, then speech rights should be protected there, even if they presently are not. The current state of affairs being what they are is not a good argument for failing to improve them. But beyond that, these platforms have explicitly promised us free expression without barriers. To give us anything less than that is fraud. 2, they say these platforms have a First Amendment right to censor, as if censorship were a form of protected speech, but it isn't. Censorship is a form of conduct. The state has always been able to regulate conduct. The idea that censorship is speech was forcefully rejected by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in their recent decision to uphold an anti-discrimination law in Texas. The court mocked the idea that buried somewhere in the enumerated right to free speech lies a corporation's unenumerated right to muzzle speech. No such right exists. And how could it? The claim that censorship is speech is as nonsensical as saying war is peace or freedom is slavery. 3, they say these platforms are like newspapers. They can't be forced to print anything they don't want to, but they aren't like newspapers. They aren't curating every piece of content they host, and they aren't expressing themselves when they host it. They're merely conduits for the speech of others. That's how they've repeatedly described themselves, including in court proceedings, and that's how Section 230 treats them. I think it's tempting, and I fell to this temptation myself, to view some of the opposition that the Bee has faced as being an attack on comedy. That's what I used to think, is that they were trying to cancel comedy. It's just people wanting to safeguard their feelings and not be offended by things. But I don't think that's entirely accurate. I think the attack is really aimed at truth and our right to speak it. And the further we zoom out, I think the more it looks like comedy may just be collateral damage in that bigger conflict. In 2021, Facebook announced they'd be changing the way they handle satire. They said they'd allow it, but with new limitations that prevent satirists from making jokes about marginalized people who lack power and privilege. True satire, they said, does not punch down. Satire that punches down, that is satire that takes aim at protected targets that they don't want you joking about, would now be subject to censorship. In fact, they made it clear that they'll consider jokes that punch down to be hatred disguised as satire. These are their words. They said, indeed, humor can be an effective mode of communicating hateful ideas. Now this is kind of a new concept, relatively new concept, this idea of punching down. I don't know if you guys have heard this or not, but it's now the number one rule of comedy. It used to be the number one rule of comedy was what? Be funny, right? Write jokes that people laugh at. Now the number one rule of comedy is don't punch down. And I think it's the most insane thing ever to put comedians in a situation where when they're writing a joke, they have to think to themselves, you know what? I shouldn't joke about those people. They're beneath me. How condescending is that? To have this idea that we're on this hierarchy and some of us rank above others, and we have to think of ourselves as being in that position. We're in a position of power and privilege. They're down here, they're lowly, they're beneath me. I shouldn't joke about them. I should be hands off with them. I think that's insane. I think it's extremely condescending. But not only that, I think it's silly to suggest that the jokes that we're making, for example, the joke about Rachel Levine, is supposed to be punching down. That's the reason that we were suspended, is because we punched down. It was considered hateful conduct. We made a joke about someone in a marginalized community. What does marginalized even mean? We're talking about a white, male, high-ranking government official. And I can't make a joke about that person? How am I punching down? One way that I put it is this: if you have both the power, the will and the power to punish anyone who so much as jokes at your expense, are you in a position of powerlessness? Are you marginalized? I don't have that kind of power. You can make any joke you want about me. I can't get you silenced for making jokes about me. So I think it's actually the opposite of what they say. I think these are the most powerful people in the world. And they have the most powerful corporations and powerful people behind them, backing them. And so if anything, we're punching back. I think we're punching up. But I don't think that Facebook is trying to kill comedy by prohibiting jokes that allegedly punch down. That's not the purpose of the policy. What they're trying to do is keep something else alive, namely the kind of bad ideas that comedians mock so effectively. And what are these bad ideas that can't survive a little mockery? Well, the most obvious example is the one that the Rachel Levine joke was aimed at, the gender madness that's running rampant in our culture. It's led to the denial of the most basic facts of human biology, facts that we all agreed upon right up until about 10 minutes ago. It's an ideology loaded with wild, extremely mockable ideas. We're told men can become women and women can become men. We're told sex is assigned at birth rather than observed, as if doctors just make their best guess whenever they see a newborn baby. We're told men can become pregnant and chest feed. And these are not fringe ideas promoted by radicals on Reddit. They're mainstream. You can go to healthline.com and type in, "Can men get pregnant?" and this is the answer you see. Yes, it's possible for men to become pregnant and give birth to children of their own. In fact, it's probably a lot more common than you might think. In order to explain, we'll need to break down some common misconceptions about how we understand the term man. So the people who just answered yes to the question, "Can men get pregnant?" are going to clear up misconceptions for us. Not very promising. Now, it'd be bad enough, in my view, if these ideas were merely popular. But they're not merely popular. They've gone from mainstream to mandatory. That's the problem. You can't criticize them. And now, thanks to hateful conduct policies that prohibit punching down, you can't even joke about them. Comedians are being canceled if they step out of line and tell an off-limits joke. I think it's crazy. So how did we get here? What is the explanation for how we got to this place where insane ideas are not just popular but sacred? And they are sacred. They're untouchable. How did we get to a point where it's considered hateful to tell the truth, even in jest? I think the answer to that question is very simple and straightforward, and you don't hear a lot of people say it. I think it's that we took bad ideas too seriously. Instead of laughing at absurdity, we accepted it. Instead of ridiculing bad ideas, we tolerated them. The absurd has become sacred only because it hasn't been sufficiently mocked. But mockery is mean and cruel, right? That's the response I often get when I say that. They say, it's just a form of bullying. You're just being mean to people for the sake of being mean to hurt their feelings. And no, that's not the case at all. We're not talking about mockery for the purpose of putting people down and making them feel bad. We're talking about using it as a tool to expose foolishness for what it is so that it isn't taken seriously. Mockery of this kind is a moral imperative for the obvious reason that bad ideas taken seriously have catastrophic consequences. Ask any mutilated teen who now regrets their gender transition surgery, or any female cellmate, or any inmate at a women's-only prison whose female cellmate got her pregnant. Imagine if the ideas that produced these results had been laughed at instead of lauded. C.S. Lewis, I love quoting C.S. Lewis, I quote him frequently, said that good philosophy must exist, if for no other reason, because bad philosophy needs to be answered. This is as true now as it's ever been. Bad ideas are everywhere, and social media increases the speed with which they spread and infect minds all over the world. There can never be enough opposition to them. They say that evil prevails when good men do nothing, and I think that's certainly true. But it's also true that madness prevails when sane men say nothing. We cannot preserve sanity with silence. Joe Rogan said that the funniest comedy right now is coming from the Babylon Bee. This is his statement. He said, "They're so consistently funny because the funniest stuff right now is woke stuff." He didn't say stuff. I'm editing him. "And that's the stuff that people on the left can't touch." He's right, but it's not just that wokeness is hysterical. It also happens to be harmful. The first time we interviewed Elon Musk, he called wokeness a mind virus and said it's one of the greatest threats to modern civilization. I asked him why he thought it was so dangerous and destructive, and he paused for a minute to think. And then he said, "At its heart, wokeness is divisive, exclusionary, and hateful. It basically gives mean people a shield to be cruel while armored in false virtue." I couldn't agree more. And that's why we target wokeness with so much of our humor. Bad ideas don't just need to be refuted, they need to be ridiculed. For the sake of sanity, they need to be mocked. There are many things that are off limits in comedy now, and people think that represents progress, and I disagree with them. They think we've improved morally because we make fun of fewer things. Those people are idiots. We're more depraved than ever because we're affirming and accepting what we should be ridiculing and rejecting. At the Babylon Bee, we're just satirists. We write jokes on the internet for a living. That's our humble calling. We're expert online trolls, as some put it. But somehow we found ourselves on the front lines of a battle for the preservation of freedom and the restoration of sanity. I honestly have no idea how that happened, but I do know that satire is never more necessary than when reality and rationality are under attack. You can't refute claims rooted in relativism where truth itself is a moving target. You can't reason with people who've abandoned rationality on purpose, but you can and you must ridicule their bad ideas. Nothing, after all, undercuts lunacy and lies like laughter. Thank you. We're going to do a Q&A now, I guess, if we have time. I don't know how much time I took up or how much we have left, but... Oh, we have lots of time. All right. Hope you thought of some questions. I guess I just point to whoever's hand is up. This is weird. I feel like a teacher. I saw you first, so go ahead.
2 questions.
Are you a woman, I assume?
Yes.
Okay.
I hope that was obvious.
Don't want to get it wrong.
First question, what do you think these platforms should do with content that's walking the line or surrounding the line that the courts have drawn for First Amendment protected speech? So either like maybe inciting violence, content that's directly inciting violence, or content that's coming very close to that line. Second question, what is your favorite Babylon Bee prediction that has come true and then been featured on Not the Bee?
Well, I mean, when it comes to lawful versus unlawful speech, I think that's, well, it's not necessarily always a clear line. You know, the courts have made a lot of decisions along those lines, and we have laws that outline that for us. So we have something to reference to determine what's lawful and what's not. Elon's approach to Twitter, what he would like to do is basically say that as long as what you're saying is lawful, you should be able to say it here. And the reason that he says that is because he considers Twitter the de facto town square. It's like the modern public square. Even though it's digital, it's online, and it's a privately owned company, this is where people talk, including where government officials talk to the public. And so the standard that he wants to see on his own platform is one that protects lawful speech. And I think that's a good place to start. I mean, and when you start encroaching on speech beyond that, then you start making all of these subjective decisions about what's acceptable and what's not. And a lot of it is ideologically motivated or politically motivated. And then you end up with politically motivated viewpoint discrimination and all of the issues that we've had from all of that. So I certainly don't like that these tech companies, well, I do have some sympathy to companies having the freedom to do what they want to do with their business. I certainly like to have the freedom to do what I want to do with my business. These companies are in a unique position. Like I mentioned, you know, they're serving a public function. And there is a legal principle that several Supreme Court justices have made mention of over the years. I don't know how many cases have hinged on it, but that the more you open up your private property to public use, the less rights you have and the more you have to respect the rights of the people who are using it. And I think common carrier doctrine kind of reflects that principle. And so, you know, the unique function that these platforms are serving, I think, lends at least some credibility to the argument that they should be treated like a public square and lawful speech should be upheld there. Does that answer the first question? And then the second one, man, so if you go in my bio on Twitter or Instagram, I have a link to like my, what do you call it? The page of links, I forget. Linktree, yes, Linktree. They haven't suspended me yet, thankfully. If you go to my Linktree, which I link to from my bio, I have a link to, I quote Shakespeare, he said, "Jesters do oft prove prophets." And if you click on that, it'll take you to a spreadsheet where we have all these jokes that came true. And there's about 92, 93 of them now. There's nearly 100. I don't know which one's my favorite. I think some of them are pretty hysterical. There was one recently that just came true. We had done a joke in 2021 about how the study found that the only people still wearing masks are just unattractive. And super unattractive, I think we said, or something like that. And then a study was actually done that found that people who were insecure about how they looked were more likely to wear masks. And it was like it was almost the exact same headline verbatim, and even the same like stock image that was used for the article. So when you put them side by side, it's as if they copied the Babylon Bee's website to do that study and that story. So ones like that I think are really, really funny. But I mean, there's just a bunch of them. Go check out the spreadsheet and see all the craziness. We had a bunch of other hands. I don't know where they went. Do you want to go to whoever? I don't want to have to call on. Yeah, you can just go around to. Yeah, sure. Yeah, just pick. You can just make your way around.
Hi, I'm Matthew. I think wokeness and being woke is one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot, gets beaten like a dead horse when you're on Twitter. Everyone's saying, "Oh, this is woke. No, this is woke." It's like, no.
Everything I don't like is woke.
What do you think? How would you define it yourself now in at least the socio-political climate that we've reached up to this point? Because the definition's definitely changed over time.
Well, it depends on who you ask what the definition is. It's not just that the definition has changed. You ask somebody who thinks there's nothing wrong with wokeness, and they'll define it as something like, well, wokeness is just not being a jerk.
Well, that's why I asked you.
Yeah, wokeness is being nice and not being a racist, a bigot, you know? It's wanting everybody to have an equal playing field and whatever. And I think it's a lot more than that. You know, I think wokeness is kind of predicated in this idea. It's a philosophy, it's a worldview. It is, in fact, a worldview that divides everybody up into the oppressed and the oppressor. It's a great example of it is the principle that the number one rule of comedy should now be don't punch down instead of be funny. That's wokeness. In practice, that's wokeness. It's this idea that there are people who are beneath me that have less power and privilege than me, and I shouldn't joke about them. And so they take away it rights old wrongs or perceived wrongs. Sometimes they're not even real wrongs. Sometimes mere disparities are deemed discriminatory or discrimination, for example. And so there's not even a real wrong that's happening, but it's treated as a wrong, and then they try to correct it with these ideas that we need to fix this problem of the fact that there are oppressors and the oppressed. And so we look at race and gender, and we divide everybody up into these classes. So wokeness at bottom is that. You know, there's this like sociocultural Marxism at play behind all of it, and it plays out, and that's why it's kind of difficult for people to define it, because they see something like the situation where we got in trouble for making fun of Rachel Levine, and they consider that wokeness, but maybe they can't articulate why it's wokeness. But that's how I would define it. It's a worldview that divides people into the oppressed and the oppressors, and what makes it particularly difficult to combat in the public square right now, and the reason that we've had difficulty is because it's enforced by mob rule. So it's not just a worldview that people are arguing for, it's a worldview that people are enforcing by shouting down and penalizing and deplatforming anybody who challenges it. And so there's that at play too. So you could define it a number of different ways. I'm sure there are people who have different definitions of it in this room, but that's at least I think a rough attempt at outlining it. I don't know. Maybe that was terrible. You guys don't seem too enthusiastic about it. You're all woke to me.
Do you want to take turns?
You guys were kicked off of Twitter a little while ago, and obviously a lot's changed since then with Elon acquiring it, you being brought back, but there's still a lot of volatility in and around the platform. I know you guys are investing in it now, but are you planning on investing in any alternatives right now? And how do you feel about the longevity of the platform?
Platform being Twitter. Yes. Well, for a long time, there was a lot of concern that we wouldn't get back on Twitter and that we would continue to see other platforms fall. You know, we've been threatened a lot by Facebook. We no longer make any money on Facebook. We're really throttled there. We don't drive a lot of traffic. Most of our ads get disapproved. We get flagged for incitement to violence all the time. It's ridiculous. YouTube, similar challenges. So there were all these alternative platforms that were popping up, you know, that people were flocking to. Parler is a great example of that, you know. And so we basically we were setting up an account on everything to try to build as much of an audience as we could on all of these third tier platforms in an effort to have a fallback in the event that we lost access to these primary platforms. And we did lose access to Twitter for a while. We never thought that we would get it back, honestly. But those other platforms, you know, I very quickly came to see that there's huge problems with this idea that you can set up, you know, a conservative social media site or a free speech social media site that's launched for that purpose now as an alternative to what's out there. First of all, they try to pull the rug out from underneath it. You saw what happened with Parler. They took it off the internet, basically. It wasn't available even in the App Store. It was blamed for January 6th. And so you have the situation where they attack it and they try to prevent you from doing it, even though they went and told us, go build your own. There's that, but then there's also this problem of them being an ideological echo chamber, and I just don't see the value in that. I don't see the value in being on a platform where almost everybody who's there agrees with you. You know, the reason that Twitter is so awesome is because Twitter is where debate happens. It's where real discourse happens. It's where you can be challenged, you can be ratioed for saying something, you know, that's provocative, and then the other side gets a hold of it and it goes viral with their friends. And there's a lot of that. There's combat of ideas happening on Twitter. That's what That's what a healthy democracy needs, is people pushing back on each other and challenging each other's ideas. It's the reason why I so strongly oppose the censorship that was happening with the, COVID censorship is a great example of that, where one side of the debate was being completely silenced, including experts in their field who were pushing back on whatever the prevailing narrative was. Their voices were being silenced. The debate wasn't being allowed to happen. And by the way, it's the censorship that was happening in that area was a knockdown argument against censorship. They say now, the way they justify that censorship is they say, well, it was based on what we knew at the time. And if you say that, you're admitting that knowledge changes over time. So if knowledge changes over time, you should never censor anybody. You might be censoring somebody who's saying something true, and you're not going to find out until tomorrow. So that's really a knockdown argument against censorship. But as far as my hope for these platforms, look, Elon Musk did an incredible thing. He was very concerned that we had been kicked off. He was upset about it personally. It wasn't the only reason he went and bought Twitter. There was, he wanted to restore free speech, and he saw a huge issue with speech being restricted the way that I do. And I'm grateful to him for doing that, but like I said, we can't be dependent on benevolent billionaires for that. There needs to be some other recourse, because these other platforms, we can't just wait for Elon Musk to buy them or someone else like him to buy them. Free speech does need to be protected in the public square. So as far as the future of the platform, I don't know. He's got it in a new CEO's hands, but he told us when we just talked to him recently in San Francisco, we interviewed him a second time a couple of weeks ago. He said that he is the one writing the Constitution, setting the ground rules. She has to abide by them or she's out. So I don't know. I mean, I do actually have a decent amount of confidence in him because I've gotten to know him personally, and I know how he really cares about these issues. So as long as it's in his hands, I think that he will stay as committed to free speech as he can within the bounds of the laws of the countries that he's hosting people's speech in. But yeah, my hope for other platforms is there's not a positive outlook there. I don't know where the mic went. Oh, she's going over here.
Hi, Seth. Thank you for the talk. I have two questions. The first is around the role of satire and comedy. And I know you talked about the legal protections that the country has, and obviously we should protect speech equally. But I'm curious, from a social perspective, do you think that satire or comedy, from a political perspective, should have different standards than regular speech or regular political speech because of the way that it operates? And the second question is more casual, which is I'm just very curious about how you guys interview journalists for the Babylon Bee. Do you just take them out for drinks and see if they're funny, or how do you figure out who's, or I guess satirists, comedians? How do you figure out how to select people? I'm very curious about that.
I hope we're not hiring any journalists. So wait, hold on to the mic, because the first part of the first question I didn't fully understand exactly what you were getting at.
Yeah, what I was trying to get at is
what standards? What do you mean?
Do you think that we should have, as a society, I mean, this is more of a moral question than a legal question, different standards for comedians because of their role in society? They're often pushing boundaries, saying things that might offend people. Do you think that as a society we should just have different standards around comedic speech or satiric speech than regular old political debate?
I don't know. I think that, well, no. I'll say no. I don't think there should really be standards in the sense that someone is deciding what you're allowed to say or what's appropriate for you to say. I don't think that anybody has the right to tell you what is appropriate, because you're going to have a lot of people who think that it's extremely offensive. There may be people in this room right now who think it's extremely offensive for me to stand up here and say Rachel Levine is a man. They find that to be beyond the pale because it's misgendering, it's hateful conduct. Well, I think it's true. It's a statement, it's an objective truth that I'm saying, and I think I have every right to say it. Whether I'm saying it in a joke on the Babylon Bee or I'm saying it on Twitter seriously in debate with somebody, I think I have a right to say. I don't think that the standard changes. I think comedians bear a certain responsibility for pushing back on bad ideas and finding ways to expose them, and that they should be, like I said, the comedian's job is to poke holes in the popular narrative. I was talking with Joe Rogan about this, and I was explaining how there is a moral imperative to Mockery. There's a moral imperative to what the comedian does and what he takes aim at, what he focuses on. And Joe disagreed with me. He said that comedians, they're just supposed to be funny. And I was looking at it more from the satirist perspective. Satire typically has some kind of moral purpose to it. What you're trying to do is cut out social cancers. You're not, the way that I put it when I was talking to Rogan about it, I said, we're not running around with a knife trying to stab people and hurt them. We're more like using the precision of a scalpel to cut out social cancers before they kill the host. That's what satire is supposed to do. It's supposed to take aim at those things and dig at them, and sometimes it hurts, but it's for a healing purpose, basically. So I think comedy, there's a moral purpose to comedy of that kind, and the kind that the satirist does. Oftentimes we're just making dumb jokes to be funny. The CNN purchases an industrial-sized washing machine to spin the news before publication is not an example of some kind of moral, joke that's cutting out a social cancer. It's just a silly joke about CNN's bias. But no, I don't. As far as the difference in standards between individuals speaking and comedians, no, I don't think that we should have. Yes, of course, there are things that people are going to say that are offensive, but we should be very concerned about protecting the right to say them anyway. What was the other question?
How do you guys select the best, funniest people to be part of the Babylon Bee?
They often find us. Our editor-in-chief sent in a bunch of ideas when we first hired him. He was, the Bee, when it first launched, you may remember this really old joke about how Holy Spirit unable to move through congregation as fog machine breaks. And it showed a picture of this really cloudy sanctuary where you couldn't even see the stage. Kyle Mann wrote that joke and submitted it by email to the Babylon Bee the week the site launched. And he submitted a bunch of others too. Once he became aware that there was a site out there, he started saying, and he's a construction worker and part-time pastor, but he was firing off these jokes that were really funny. So we hired him. We hired him part-time initially, and then when I took over the site in 2018, I made him our editor-in-chief. So we've hired a few people that way that were just submitting ideas to us. We don't really put up job postings where we're we're searching for journalists, as you said, satirists. They kind of come to us. They kind of navigate. They just are attracted to the site and reach out and submit funny stuff. Most of the stuff we get is junk, though. Total junk. Sure.
How did Not the Bee get started? And did you share a team of writers?
So Not the Bee was an answer to, you had a lot of people who were posting really crazy news stories, real news stories, and saying, this is not the Onion, this is real, or this is not the Bee, this is real. And they were using a hashtag, not the Bee, not the Bee. And it was this trending hashtag for a while where a lot of people were tagging stories with this hashtag. And so we got the idea, we're look, if the world ever does really become too absurd to be satirized, we need to have a fallback, right? Let's just report the real news that's so crazy at that point. So we'll create this secondary site, Not the Bee, and that site will be dedicated to reporting on all the news that should be satire but somehow isn't. So that's really where the idea came from, and it was in 2020 when we launched it. So it's not the same writers, though. That's actually, I wouldn't say that we hire journalists for that, but it's more of content curation. You're just out there looking for whatever the craziest headlines are and then doing a brief write-up on it and featuring them.
Full disclosure, I'm a fan of the Babylon Bee. I've shared a lot of your links. I think it's really funny. And but you said the role of a satirist is to use the precision of a scalpel to cut out social cancers before they kill the host. Then why do you go so soft on someone like Trump, who's not only walking satire in the first place with plenty of material to work with, but is not only a dangerous and divisive force in the culture, but he's also done a lot of damage to the conservative movement as well?
The question was, why don't we do what with Trump?
Why go so soft on Trump? is basically the root of the question.
I don't think that that's an accurate characterization. I mean, we've got, if you do a site search, to go to Google and do site:/babylonbee.com Trump, and you'll see all the mentions of Trump on our site. I think we've done thousands of Trump headlines. It's crazy. We've written about Trump more than anybody else. Not all of it is positive. I think we even did one early on when he was running for president where Trump went on CNN and forgot to take his white hood off or something like that. And it was a picture of him with a KKK hood on his head. And we're kind of making fun of the people who make fun of him, but also making fun of him. I mean, we've done more jokes about Trump than anybody else. So he's usually pretty good-natured about them and has been a fan of the Bee over the years. But the people who go after Trump are ridiculous too. So we really see it as an all-sides thing. We try to make fun of everybody. We make fun of AOC a lot. You disagree? You think that we're really friendly to Trump? I think you've missed a lot of our headlines. I mean, even the joke Trump, I've done more for Christianity than Jesus. You don't think that's a joke about Trump's ego?
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. There's so much material.
Yeah.
It seems like you're really only using one side of the political spectrum. But there's a lot more to work with, you know?
I think that's demonstrably false. You got to spend more time looking on the site. But you'll find hundreds of jokes about Trump at his expense. We do it both ways, but I don't know where the mic is. She'll find you. There she is. There's one over there too. Dueling mics.
So my question
is,
is about American culture, and I sometimes get the sense that people are sort of raised in a way where Americans are very much taught to be very tolerant people, and I feel like what's happened is with wokeness, it's sort of like the story of the emperor has no clothes, and so you may not be a woke person yourself. I think generally, like most Americans don't agree that a biological man can become a woman. But there's sort of this hesitance and this reticence to like say that because it's considered rude and offensive. Whereas if anybody here has seen the documentary, What is a Woman? He travels to Africa and people are very open with just sort of basic facts and basic realities. So do you think that is sort of a component of American culture and the way that we raise kids that predates even like sort of this rise of wokeness, that like you're taught to be tolerant of everybody and everything, even if it's like really the most like out there, like batshit crazy stuff?
Yeah, I mean, the word tolerant is used a lot to describe the ideology behind wokeness, that it's, you know, just like there was a panel earlier on diversity, equity, inclusion, right? This idea that we're tolerating everyone and everything. I don't see tolerance, I see extreme intolerance in wokeness. I think it's like the Musk quote. I quoted him saying that it's an excuse to be mean and cruel while armored in false virtue. The false virtue is that you're compassionate, that you're tolerant. You're really not. There's no tolerance for other viewpoints. There's no tolerance for reality in wokeness. And there's no tolerance for anyone who acknowledges it. You're literally, your voice is taken away. So I don't see tolerance there at all. I do think that people have this idea that a lot of young people are being conditioned to think that worldview is tolerant and that they have a moral duty to be tolerant in that way. I just don't think that they realize that they're not being tolerant at all. There's a great Chesterton quote about how, you know, the purpose of having an open mind is like having an open mouth. It's to shut it again on something solid. And I think that the way that we should be training young people is to have that kind of mentality towards, you know, obviously, yes, be open to finding out what's true and engaging in discourse and debate to seek the truth, but then when you discover the truth, close your mind on that and defend it vigorously.
So you talk a little bit
Those are
about...
great questions, by the way.
You talk a little bit about legislation to make Twitter a more appropriate public meeting space or a place for debate. But my inclination is that that's kind of a lost cause and that the entire setup of Twitter is not conducive to fruitful public debate at all. I was wondering if you see any side to that and if you think there's any solution to that, or we're just kind of, Twitter is our public square, that's what we're dealing with, and given that, we have to make the best of it.
What do you think is not, I mean, obviously there's people who fight and are mean to each other on Twitter, but why do you say that it's not fruitful?
I think it doesn't, I mean, to be fair, I'm not on Twitter often because I don't think it's fruitful, but I think it doesn't conduce to empathetic interaction, first of all, because it's on a screen, and second of all, I'm not sure it's conducive to deep thought because it's blurbs.
I really agree with the point about it being on a screen. You know, like you're safe behind your monitor and keyboard, and you can have an anonymous avatar, no one knows who you are, and you can just be a troll and whatever, and you don't actually engage with people sometimes, seeing them as a person. Though you would engage with them very differently if you sat down with them over coffee, for example, than if you're going at it with them on Twitter. That can certainly be the case, but it's also there's pros and cons, right? You also get to reach a lot more people with what you say on Twitter than if you just go to a coffee shop with a friend and talk with one person about it. You know, some of my tweets have been seen millions of times, a single tweet. So there's tremendous utility in that in terms of having amplification of your voice and being able to have a dialogue and interaction that is on a trending topic, a current topic, and gets wide reach and is exposed to a lot of people. There are, for as many people as there are who are abusing Twitter, there's a lot of people on there who are engaged in good faith debate, and a lot of ideas are being challenged there. I think, I don't love fact checking, I hate fact checking, but what Community Notes is doing is really interesting, where you have a lot of false claims that are being made, including claims that are being put out by the media that claims to be the arbiters of truth, that fact check other people. I've seen fact checkers get fact checked by Community Notes, and it's a beautiful thing. It's wonderful to see that there's actually a place where it's not just them shoving a narrative down your throat. There's another voice that's being added to the mix that's saying, no, that's not true, and here's why. And that's all being played out on Twitter right now. It's where I think some of the more meaningful discussions are happening. So you got to you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater and get rid of it just because there's some of that immaturity and vitriol and the lack of empathy and the like.
What do you feel the best ownership structure for a satire company is, and why?
The one where I own the majority and get to make all the decisions, which I do. It's great. Or the one where Elon Musk buys it for $200 million and he owns the majority. I don't know. The best ownership structure for a satire company. I've never gotten a question like that before. I've never really thought about that. I don't know how many different ownership structures you could potentially have. What do you have in mind?
So obviously you could have a publicly held company, which say risks being bought out by a political head. You have a privately held company which avoids that, but might have a harder time sourcing funding or growing to be a
That's what you're getting at, yeah.
Or you have obviously a nonprofit.
Yeah, I think it all depends on what your goal is, what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, we have a specific worldview and a specific purpose, and so we're very careful about who we hire and how they mesh with that worldview. I don't think we'd have any interest in ever going public. I also don't think that we would necessarily have any issue raising money if we needed to. Being privately owned has its advantages, and there's when you're an effective voice in the culture and you have enough of a following, I think you can still raise money pretty easily. It just depends on how popular you are, I guess. Next.
I was wondering internally at the B, where do you draw the line in terms of this is maybe too, this is funny, but too offensive, maybe in bad taste, or maybe just, I don't know, too offensive for the amount of funniness you get. There's a scale of okay, if you're gonna piss off a ton of people, but it's really, really funny, it's worth it. But if you're gonna piss off a ton of people, it's not that funny. I was just curious, internally, how do you go about thinking about that? And also, how often do you get jokes and you're I don't know if I want to run that?
Yeah. Well, we do have internal conversations sometimes about specific kinds of jokes. You want to be really careful about making the wrong joke at the wrong time. A great example would be a joke about how the SWAT team comes in and tackles the AR-15 instead of the shooter, and takes the AR-15 away. Making a joke like that on the day of a shooting or the day after a shooting might not go over too well. Being sensitive to how soon it is to a tragic event, something like that. In terms of is the joke too offensive? Is it going to upset too many people? I think one of the biggest risks that you run is doing a joke that isn't widely, on a topic that's not widely enough known. It's maybe not a popular enough news story that people maybe misinterpret your intent behind the joke, and they see some motivation from making the joke that isn't your true motivation, and they misinterpret it. There's always the danger of that, which we're trying to be careful of. We're not trying to kind of skirt around people's feelings and tell jokes that don't hurt feelings. I mean, everybody's offended by every single joke that we write. We get hate mail for every single joke. Everybody loves satire, and every email that we get from someone who's complaining starts off with, "I usually like satire, but." And then they explain why this time, because the joke was landed so close to home, it crossed a line for them. And sometimes it's really silly jokes that people are upset about, but it happens to affect them personally. And so, but that's good satire. When it's causing people, when it's bothering people, it's rubbing them the wrong way. Well, maybe there's some truth to it, and that's why they're having that kind of defensive reaction, So, I don't know. We don't really have we don't have any specific topics or jokes where we say that's off limits. You can't do that. But we are sensitive to how we do it, how it can be perceived, whether or not we're doing it, in a way that's going to be clearly understood. And we do try to avoid being mean-spirited just for the sake of being mean-spirited. Like I said, the purpose of the mockery is usually for the purpose of exposing some kind of idea that we think is deficient in some way or something that's foolish and deserving of mockery. And the things that are deserving of mockery should be mocked. Like I said, I think the reason that we're in the position that we're in right now is because there are things that were deserving of mockery, and we took them so unbelievably seriously, we made them completely off limits for any criticism whatsoever, which isn't good for anybody. Back here.
I always believe that the best storytellers win. And I think that your Californians moving to Texas was one of the funniest things I've seen in a long time. I loved how there was some time to develop a plot, get to know the characters a little bit. I think that was equivalent to a dozen or 2 dozen witty headlines. Do you think we'll see more of that going forward?
Yeah, I mean, we have, that one may be a little bit unique because it was a big hit. It went really viral and got shared millions of times. But we are trying to do more of that. We have a whole team now. We have a team out in California that's doing video production, sketch comedy, stuff like that. So the longer form, like series stuff, we are planning like a season 2, for example, of that, where we're going to do another mini series of the Californians moving to Texas. So there is more of that coming. We want to do some longer form stuff too. We're looking at doing a mockumentary in the near future. So fun stuff coming on the horizon. But we are doing more in video. It's just hard to make money with the video. It's YouTube or nothing, basically. And so, Musk is trying to attract people onto Twitter so that they'll put their video on Twitter, but there's as of yet, no way to really monetize that. So hopefully one day there will be a solution there.
Free speech in general, I feel like is a very general and abstract term, and everyone has their own sort of perspectives and opinions on what it is. I mean, the people at Twitter previously had their own perspectives that you obviously didn't agree with. Now that Elon has taken over, he'll probably make some decisions that people disagree with as well. What are your perspectives on how we can reconcile those differences that we have in terms of what is free speech and what isn't?
That's it's a hard question to answer, honestly. I think at a minimum, there's a law, I referenced the ruling of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals when they upheld a law, and the law I was referring to is HB 20 here in Texas, which is a social media censorship bill, which basically makes it unlawful for these platforms to engage in viewpoint discrimination. So, the standard there is that you're not treating people differently based on which opinion they're expressing. So that safeguards your ability to say things that are unpopular or considered offensive. It's your opinion, and you're allowed to say it. At a bare minimum, I think that having a standard like that, and look, you can get into all kinds of tricky situations, but when you go beyond having an opinion, expressing an opinion to, threatening somebody or inciting violence directly and explicitly, those things are unlawful, and so you deal with it that way. But, obviously unlawful speech is not going to be permitted on these platforms. But when it comes down to things that are lawful and they are your viewpoint, I think we can have laws that simply say you can't censor people on that basis. You shouldn't have terms of service where you claim that you're a platform for free expression without barriers, and then immediately under that you list all your barriers.
So first of all, I'd just like to say my favorite headline of the Babylon Bee has got to be, "We have information leading to the arrest of Hillary Rodham Clinton." That one's pretty good, yeah.
We did one about how, what is the one about how people with, it's something to do with the suicide rate. Like the suicide rate is way higher if you have, I'm not going to pull it up while I'm standing here, but that one went like crazy viral. I just love that the Clintons have seen these headlines. I love that they're,
That's great. Okay.
Hillary Clinton knows who I am and hates me. I think that's kind of
Okay.
Oh, CDC said something about how, the suicide rate was someone. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Oh, no. But there's a common internet comment that people who are critical of the Clintons tend to get very, very depressed.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
I'm
enough
not suicidal,
body
by the way.
count
I'm
stuff.
very happy. I love my life. I love my children. I love my family.
Wow, okay.
I just want everyone to know that.
Yeah. It was good. It was good talking with you. Maybe a slightly loaded question, but would you fire somebody at the Bee or reconsider their position at the Bee if they held views that either you disagree with, you find abhorrent, or they're not really in line with your editorial views, if that makes sense?
No, for having different views than me? Like if I hired them and it came out and it became evident that they disagreed with me on something, would I fire them? No.
Would there be certain views that you would fire them over, even if they didn't, even if this wasn't clear in the content that they produced?
No, but do you have an example in mind?
Okay, like something ridiculous, like I don't know, a crazy anti-Semitic conspiracy theory or something along the lines. Would you then be suspicious of their involvement in the company?
Would I be suspicious of their involvement where?
In the company, on the editorial staff, wherever, associated with the Babylon Bee in some way.
Well, I mean, I don't think, I've never seen evidence that anyone on our team has those views. If you're trying to refer to like a real scenario or hypotheticals, I'm not clear on what you're getting.
No, I'm not referring to a real scenario.
Okay, these are just hypotheticals.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
Like, is there something I need to know about?
No.
I mean, obviously, there are certain people that you don't want working for you.
Right.
I think that character matters a lot, and I want good people working for me who have good character and good values. But if they have a viewpoint that I disagree with, for example, if they decide that they want to vote for a candidate other than the one that I prefer, or something like that, it's just, it's the suggestion that I wouldn't want them working for me because I disagree with them on something as silly. When you get into more serious things, though, where somebody is actually like, a neo-Nazi and you didn't know about it when you hired them, that might come back to reflect very poorly on the company, and it wouldn't necessarily be a good idea to keep them on your staff.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Yeah. I'm very glad that was just hypothetical.
Hey, Seth.
What's up?
I was wondering if, I think you really elegantly sort of described satire in its most powerful form to pursue truth. I guess I'm just wondering,
I agree.
Do you think satire in the form of the Bee can ever actually like change someone's mind? Do you think readers are open-minded enough that would happen? Or do you see its role more as just kind of like trying to shift the Overton windows, enough that someone that already holds a belief might speak more openly about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, we have actual examples of people changing their mind. We do have people who've reached out to us and let us know that they saw something differently as a result of a headline that we had written. I'll give you an example. We actually got an email from someone. She was a college athlete, and she came across a headline that said, "Motorcyclist identifies as bicyclist and sets new world record." And it shows a guy blowing past a bunch of bikes on his motorcycle. And that, it's kind of a silly recurring joke of ours that we do these. We did one about how a man identified as a 5-year-old and won a t-ball game with a grand slam and like silly stuff like that. But she wrote in to us to let us know that she saw things differently after that. That headline kind of like made it clear for her how absurd the idea of Leah Thomas, for example, jumping into a pool with a bunch of women and destroying them and beating all their records really is. It's akin to someone cheating in a bicycle race by hopping on a motorcycle. She saw that more clearly as a result of that joke and wrote into us to let us know. And I'm sure there are other people, there's other examples where we've received feedback like that, but I'm sure for every person who says something like that, there's others who have had that experience who haven't written an email to us to let us know about it. So I think it does have an effect. I think the biggest effect that it has, and the reason, I quoted Bill Maher's joke about the, the peg leg and the eye removal surgery. When comedians are willing to make those kinds of jokes and poke at the popular narrative, they undermine its strength, they undermine its validity, and so people feel safer challenging it, and they don't feel like they have to take it as seriously as they otherwise would. And so I think that's really the value in it, is when comedians are out there challenging these things that deserve to be challenged, that are just silly on their face, but somehow we've ended up treating them as if they're sacred. It's the bold comedians, it's the Dave Chappelles of the world who are out there saying, no, this is ridiculous and silly and it needs to be laughed at. And that gives other people, that kind of, the courage of the comedian to do that is contagious. So will it necessarily directly in that moment, will the joke change somebody's mind? Not necessarily, but what you are doing is you're creating a culture and a climate where absurdity is actually mocked and people feel comfortable mocking it.
Do you have any insights, or have you discovered any sort of formulas around satire and comedy that we might be able to use in ordinary conversations to make us funnier?
No, probably not. I mean, you either got it or you don't, man. You can try ChatGPT though, and I've heard that people on the dating scene are using ChatGPT to come up with responses to text messages that they don't know how to reply to. It's helping there somehow. It hasn't gotten really good at comedy yet. I did ask it, though, to make a joke in Joe Biden's voice recently. I fed it a few lines that Joe Biden had said, and then I said, say something as dumb as this. and it made up a Joe Biden quote. It said, I'm a huge fan of the 3 R's, reading and writing. I thought that was pretty good. So I don't know, maybe try ChatGPT.
My name's Nick. Thank you for coming. The funniest article was during the the headline that I've ever read from the Babylon Bee was during the 2020 primary, and Hillary had called Tulsi a Russian asset, and Tulsi fired back, and the headline goes, Hillary Clinton accidentally posts condolences for Tulsi Gabbard's suicide 1 day early. My question, though, is about Elon, because I know you know him. I don't. And so you mentioned, I know he's talked about this a lot, that what should be on Twitter should be what, I guess, in the United States would be First Amendment protected. However, there are a few specific cases that he is clearly not following this principle with. I guess 3 off the top of my head would be...
Kanye?
Well, yeah, I guess so the top 2 would be Kanye.
Can you call him Kanye?
And then Alex Jones. And clearly what Kanye, the post that got him booted off Twitter was clearly protected under the First Amendment. Mm-hmm. And then Alex Jones, clearly what he says is also protected under the First Amendment. So I'm wondering what you think this blind spot is with Elon, or maybe there's something else going on that maybe we didn't know about.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I think some of the decisions that he's made, he's unbanned a lot of people, and he has unlocked a lot of accounts. People who had been deplatformed years ago came back. And so on the one hand, he's shown a commitment to letting people speak freely, even people who had been banned for things that, weren't exactly like nice speech. But there are a few examples where he's made impulsive decisions. And for a while there, when it was at its messiest, when he came in and was very, it was kind of disruptive, and he was just making decisions on the fly and banning certain people, unbanning other people. He had actually said that he wouldn't be unlocking any accounts unless first he had a council that was formed and the council would vote on it or something like that. And then the council never happened, and he just ended up unbanning us and Jordan Peterson and who else was it? Kathy Griffin on the same day. And so, there was a lot of random stuff like that happening. I think some of that is he's very impulsive and makes decisions on the fly. So I don't know. I mean, what he's expressed to me is a firm commitment to wanting this to be a true platform for free expression, for lawful speech. And he continually says that, and he reinforced that with Tucker when Tucker was asking him, should I put my show on Twitter? Will you censor me if I do? And he said, as long as you don't say anything unlawful, no, I won't censor you. So there does seem to be inconsistency, though, with how he's handled a couple of cases. And so it's good to push him on that, to get clarity from him on why he's doing that and whether that will be corrected. I think that's fair. I don't want to do it, though. Do you want to do it? I made him mad before once.
Do you find that people who get a little bit more defensive and offended by like tweets or headlines that you guys post are generally people who don't have enough of an understanding about the issues that you're kind of poking fun at? Or do you kind of get some people too who are have a deeper understanding of these issues and still kind of get super, super offended?
I don't know that it's understanding of the issues. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people who think that satire is real. They just don't really have a good ability to grasp satire. And I also don't blame them when reality is so hard to distinguish from satire. They see these headlines and they think they're true, and they become outraged, that they've been duped or whatever, or they think it's real and they're mad at us for that reason. If it's the joke itself, though, they get that it's a joke and it's very offensive to them. It's not usually because they don't understand the issue. It's just because they're being sensitive, and a lot of the people who are most upset are people who have been kind of conditioned to think of safe spaces as being a good thing. That somehow you have a right to not be offended that trumps my right to speak freely, and no such right exists. It's those people who end up getting the most upset, the most offensive, and the most offended, and are the most vocal in the response to comedy that they don't like. And that's just really, really silly and immature. And I think it's terrible that we're teaching kids and young people as they're growing up that that they have a right to not be offended. Well, I don't advocate bullying. I think bullying is wrong. I do think that there's plenty of room for children to meet with adversity and to deal with jokes at their expense and learn to deal with that in a healthy way, a way where they build resilience and get thicker skin, rather than running and crying to their safe space and saying somebody hurt my feelings. I don't think that does anybody any good. We now have a bunch of people who are supposed to be adults who act like children as a result of that. So I'll say that the friendliest hate mail we get is from Mormons. Mormons do get offended they're big fans of the bee, and then we'll make a joke about Joseph Smith or something, and they're very offended, but they're so polite. It's the best hate mail. They'll start out their message greeting us and wishing us, telling us that they hope we're doing well, and they just wanted to send us a note to say that we really did offend them with this joke, but they're going to continue to follow us, and they're going to continue to be a fan, and they want to support us, and they'll still share our articles. They're so polite. It's unbelievable. We all need to be more like Mormons. Hate mail is fun, though. We get a lot of hate mail, and there's comedy gold in the hate mail.
Hey, I'm Adam. I'm from MIT. I love your stuff. Every time you talk about Klaus Schwab and, you will eat the bugs, that's a good day. I wanted to ask about anti-establishment strategy. As I see it, there are two main ways to do this. One is fight within the system, stay on Facebook, stay on Instagram, and fight their bans, explain why you're right and they're wrong. Another strategy is exit and build, so that's explore alternative platforms, get on Gab, build your own universities, you've done a great job with the B, so you've built the system. And I also wanted to ask, how viable do you think each of these two approaches are? And also, what should young people do to get into the fight? What's the best things that we can do to make sure we come out on top?
Good questions. I don't know I guess it really depends on the context of what you're dealing with and what the problem is. I don't think that when it comes to creating like a social media platform, like one of these big tech platforms, the answer is to go build your own, because it's not really a feasible option. You know, you're not gonna, like I said, you're not gonna get everybody in the world, including people who disagree with you, to come join your platform that's created to platform the people that they hate. You know, like the intolerant left, the people on the far left who absolutely, not just leftists in general, like someone like Bill Maher, for example, would be someone on the left who is more of a classical liberal who respects people's right to disagree with him. But you get further left of Bill, you get to people who are completely intolerant to people who disagree with him. And they're not going to want anything to do with a platform. You see them objecting to what Elon Musk is doing on Twitter. They hate free speech. The last thing they want is free speech. They want as much censorship as possible around areas like misinformation and hateful conduct. You know, and a lot of it comes down to them just not wanting to hear viewpoints they don't like. As far as the strategy goes, though, for deciding whether we should stay or leave, I've always been firmly in the camp of we should stay and not cede the ground. We shouldn't take our voices out of the conversation. We shouldn't have, if this is where the public square is, if Twitter is, like Elon Musk described it, the de facto town square, the Supreme Court has called it the modern public square. If that's what Twitter is, then why would I leave Twitter and go whisper with my friends in the corner where no one can hear me? You know, that doesn't benefit anyone else. I think it's remarkable right now we have a whole conversation going on about scientists wanting to leave Twitter, you know, because this whole situation with Joe Rogan challenging this guy to a debate. And the scientists want to leave Twitter now because they've been invited to a debate? Really? That's why they want to leave? It's remarkable to me that people will remove themselves from the conversation when they supposedly have something valuable to offer. Why would you remove yourself from the conversation? Why would you extract yourself from the fight? I think if you have ideas worth advancing that you think you can defend, then you should be, wherever people are speaking, you should have your voice there, and you should fight for your right to be there. And like I said before, we do have to make a distinction when I say a right to be there. We don't technically right now, under the current law, have a right to be on Twitter. You don't have a right to be on Facebook. But there is a question as to whether you should be, whether you should have that right. And we do have to distinguish between the way things are and the way that they should be, and whether there should be laws that protect our right to be on these platforms if they are held out as platforms for free expression without barriers. And if that's the promise that they make to their users, should they have to keep it? And if they are the public square, then yes, we should be allowed to talk there and talk there freely. So I don't advocate for running off and starting our own platform. Well, but it depends on what the situation is. If there's you know, a way to build viable alternatives in areas where it's much more likely that you can succeed and get off the ground, then sure, go do that. I don't really have a problem with having like parallel economies and stuff like that. But when it comes to the public square itself, the social media platforms, you know, the YouTube and Twitter and whatever, I don't think leaving is helping us. For young people? Well, I mean, the place to start is to actually speak, is to not censor yourself. I don't think I made this point in my talk, but I often do. I consider censorship, when you self-censor, you're doing the tyrant's work for him. And there's so much pressure right now for people to censor themselves and guard what they say because they don't want to be deemed hateful or intolerant or whatever. And the best thing that people can do, because when we're all censoring ourselves, the person who does speak up is an outlier and they're easy to squash. But when our numbers grow, it becomes much more difficult. So I think the most important thing is just having a willingness to speak. The more you censor yourself, the less likely it is that you're ever going to be able to regain the speech rights that you've given up on your own. Yep. Right here.
What are your current thoughts on America?
My current thoughts on what?
America. America.
America? You got to give me more than that. What do you mean? I love America.
If satire is a big purpose of it is for social change, and a lot of social change can come from Twitter with the right likes and retweets and seeing the social proof there, is there also room for social change within, you know, IRL spaces like comedy clubs? And does the Bee have any interest in getting into that game?
Like local comedy clubs?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't really do, what we do is different than stand-up comedy, I think. You know, you kind of have to distinguish. It's why Joe Rogan and I didn't really see eye to eye on what we thought was the purpose of what we were doing to some extent. But probably not. I mean, what we do and the way that we do it, we reach a much larger audience than a comedian does going into a club and doing a show there. So we would only limit our reach if we started going into clubs like that, and we don't have any stand-up comics that I'm aware of. Well, Adam Yenzer does some stand-up comedy. We do have one guy. But beyond him, I don't know who would do that. So it's not really our thing. But again, like I said, we are trying to get into the video stuff and doing more of the sketches and mockumentary style stuff. So that'll be fun. And it'll reach a lot of people, ideally. We're running out? Go ahead. I can hear you from here, I think.
Hi, Seth. Thanks for coming. My question follows on from Adam's and is, what is your advice on not being canceled while like still speaking freely? Like, how do you tread the line between combating like wokeism while like not hurting yourself?
Well, I guess there's a couple of ways to answer that. The way that we went about it, we had a conversation before we published the Rachel Levine joke, and it's in our Slack channels. You can actually, we saved it. And there was some concern that we were going to get booted off of Facebook and Twitter if we actually published this joke. And we laughed about it. We're like, oh, if we do this one, we're going to get banned. This is, not allowed. It's an illegal joke. But we told it anyway. And I think the principle has to be that you say it anyway, even if there's going to potentially be consequences, and perhaps even especially if there's going to be consequences, because that's the kind of courage that you need. Otherwise, like I said, you self-censor. You're too concerned about keeping your platform. And it's really not that big of an ask. If you look in the history of this country, we've had people who are willing to give up their lives for freedom, and we're afraid of losing our Instagram account. When you think about it, it's like we're afraid that we're going to get kicked off of Twitter. Like, we have to be willing to give up something, or we don't really have any courage at all. You can't call that courage. So, and I do think that when people have that kind of courage, it emboldens others. So that, like I said, that courage is contagious, and I mean that. It's a good infection. It spreads. So the more people do that, the more they stand up and they actually risk losing something, knowing that they could lose something, the more other people will be emboldened by that. I mean, look what happened with it. We were kicked off of Twitter, and we refused to delete that joke. And in part, that played a role in Elon Musk buying the platform and freeing it up and restoring us. For all we knew, we had given up Twitter permanently, and we would never tweet again. So you have to be willing to do that to actually make a difference.
Just to follow up, so as an individual, like for example, Jordan Peterson was like fired from Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you like ensure that you can still like maintain your life? Like, is the answer to like try and cultivate like multiple income streams or something?
Yeah, well, I think that it's the toughest case is where you have somebody who's like, well, yeah, I have a family to feed. If I speak out, I could lose my job. And I guess the problem with that is, well, if everyone thinks that way, then no one will ever be able to speak out ever again. Someone at some point has to be willing to lose their job. Someone at some point had to be willing to lose their lives. So, there is potentially a price to pay for that. But I think the only way, you can't win the battle against cancel culture by giving them everything that they want voluntarily and muzzling yourself and going along with everything and using the language they try to compel you to use. There's no winning in that, and there's no courage in that.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, what advice do you have for people looking to create institutions, whether within or without of the system, like you've done with the Babylon Bee?
What kind of institutions do you have in mind? Just anything? talking about starting a business? What are you talking about?
Well, things like the Babylon Bee, Andrew Torba with Gab. I'm not sure if I trust him, but at least he's trying. Anything to create new institutions rather than the crumbling ones we have.
Yeah. I mean, I think the winning, there were a couple of things that contributed to the Bee's success. Adam Ford, the guy that started the Bee, he was he saw a void that needed to be filled. So that was one thing. He was trying to serve an underserved market. And this is people who have a different worldview than, for example, The Onion, who see reality differently than they do. No one was telling them jokes that would make any sense to them, because The Onion's audience has bought into their worldview, their perception of reality, their narrative, and so they think their jokes are funny. But what about the other side? There was nobody serving them. All of the left dominated comedy for a very long time, still does. So Adam was kind of looking at, well, is there a void that I could potentially fill? And if so, would this thing take off as a result? And clearly, there was a void there, and I mean, the Bee had millions of visitors within the first few months of launching, because there was just so many people who were hungry for that. So, I mean, finding somewhere where there's demand for something and filling it is obviously a great business strategy. But beyond that, you need talented people. You can't just, there's a reason why there aren't a lot of Babylon Bees, is because there aren't a lot of people who are great at satire. And so it's challenging to get something like that off the ground. You have to have talented people. There's no way around that. But I do think that one of the reasons the Bee is so successful, it's not, it was launched as the tagline was your trusted source for Christian news satire. And so often, Christian versions of things are really cheesy and poor knockoff versions of things. Christian movies tend to be rather bad. Christian TV shows, things of that nature. And I think one thing to keep in mind that I think is useful, it's another principle I'll borrow from C.S. Lewis. He said, we don't need more Christian books. We need more good books written by Christians. And I think it's a subtle but significant distinction between the two, where you have something that's just good on its own and it happens to be run by people of a certain worldview. It can be more latent than explicit and drawn out on the surface. So that's good too. Leading with good content, something that's quality, is much more important than trying to beat somebody over the head with your own ideas. Well, thank you guys. Thank you very much.